Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Tuesday, October 22nd. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, we are recapping the first base position from this past season and revealing our way too early top 12 at first base for 2025. But first, the World Series is set. East versus West. Powerhouse versus powerhouse. MVP versus MVP. Studs everywhere. The Los Angeles Dodgers are taking on the Bronx Bombers. My New York Yankees.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Do I even have to ask who you guys are rooting for?
I would have rather you played the of all the dramatic things.
I probably have
sound
that
clip there.
Yeah, I will just say that it would be fun to live in New York City when one of the New York teams wins a championship. You haven't had many of them lately, notably. But
15 years since the Yankees went to the World Series, which
have any New York-based teams won since then? No, right? Did the Rangers win one?
No, the Giants, the New York Giants won.
Oh, yeah, that was like 2017, right?
2011? Weren't they like 2007 and 2011? They weren't that far apart. I don't know. I could be making that up.
Sure.
I think we could probably Google that.
Either way, I am just saying all this to say that I don't have to root for a Yankees World Series, thankfully, because the Liberty won. So I got to experience a New York championship, and now I get to root against the Yankees as my heart wants, without feeling even a little bit of doubt or guilt about it.
How could you do this to me, Chris? How can you do this?
You know, the one thing I am annoyed about is this like sour grapes BS that I'm seeing from a lot of people that like, oh, this was preordained, or oh, you just spend money to win a championship. And it's like,
it's so dumb.
Yes, these are the two marquee
years.
franchises in baseball. They are two of the 5 highest payroll teams in baseball. They've got between 7 and 9 future Hall of Famers on their rosters, depending on how you want to define that term. One of them is inactive.
Clayton
I guess Clayton Kershaw. And then it depends how
likely of the Hall of Famers between the two rosters.
Yeah, and then like I think Giancarlo Stanton's basically a coin flip at this point.
No chance.
Oh, he only needs
doesn't even have 45 WAR.
He only needs 71 home runs to get to 500, and he's putting together a really good postseason resume. Giancarlo Stanton has a really good chance to get in the Hall of Fame.
It would be one of the lowest WARs to make the Hall of Fame.
That's fine. He's gonna
recent history. I don't. The 500 home runs hasn't been a magical number.
There's only one guy.
Hall of Fame
wait, there's only one guy who didn't get in.
Oh no, there's multiple.
Oh, sorry, steroid guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no non-steroid 500 homer guys who haven't gotten in, right? It's just Palmeiro, Sosa, Bonds, A-Rod, and McGuire. I'm pretty sure that's right.
And
Sounds right.
You said Sosa?
Yeah. But either way, my point is, as preordained as you can make it seem now, the Yankees were below 500 in June and July, and like a lot of Yankees fans had given up hope. They had
right
like
here
2 healthy starters, and neither of them were good at the time.
But also, Chris, if that was the case, wouldn't this just happen every year? Like that,
Right? Like that's what I'm like.
It's
this
dumb.
like people complained, and nobody watched the World Series last year when it was the Diamondbacks and Rangers as the 6 and 7 seeds or whatever it was, and now people are and it's just like. I think it's important to remember that when people say, oh, nobody wants to see the Yankees and Dodgers in the World Series, what that actually means is 12 cranky people on Twitter who complain about everything will complain about this as well.
Yeah.
But I'm super excited for this. What more can you ask for? This is like the golden years of baseball were teams full of Hall of Famers duking it out in the World Series every year. Like this is what, when you think of the golden age of baseball, the 50s, the 60s, like it was Dodgers Yankees full of future Hall of Famers going up against each other. I am super about this.
I don't think many people who are on Twitter, not many people who are alive today, remember the 50s and 60s of baseball. So I don't know that they can have nostalgia for it.
Very few people remember the last time the Yankees and Dodgers played in the World Series. It was 41 years ago.
Yeah, no, I mean that was before
43.
Before any of us were born. So that's one thing I want to say. I'm having to like react to things you've said in addition to say my own thing here. So that's one thing. Another thing is that 15 years, again, since the Yankees have been to the World Series, if you're just distributing league championships evenly, that puts them right on pace, right?
Mm-hmm.
So nobody can say, oh, it's always the Yankees. No, that's the first time in 15 years. That's how often, if they're evenly distributed, that any team should win a league championship. Third, I just want to say they are not evenly distributed. The Yankees have been failures for quite some time. I did a lot of belly aching a couple weeks ago about the playoff format with the addition of a third wild card and extending the wild card round such that bye series are required for the top two seeds. And I still don't think that's a great way to determine a championship in baseball. But ultimately, here we are, and the leader in each league in run differential is now that league's representative in the World Series. And I think run differential is probably a better indicator of how good a team is than actually win-loss record. Though in this case, also win-loss record. The best team, the number one seed in each league, is now in the World Series. So
this is your dream come true. This is your dream come true.
Yeah. And I still would have rather seen the Phillies take on the Dodgers at some point in the playoffs. We never got that. But yeah, ultimately it worked out.
God, and so many people are mad listening to us talking about how excited we are about a Dodgers-Yankees series.
Well, the other thing is I don't like the Dodgers or the Yankees. I can't really bring myself to root for either. So I'll be watching with a non-rooting interest, which is never the most emotionally gratifying way to watch. But at least I'll feel like we have a legitimate champion when all is said and done. And the final thing I want to say is the Dodgers are doing this with two starting pitchers, basically, and one of them, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, isn't taking on like a starting pitcher workload. The other's Jack Flaherty. Yeah, Walker Buehler's making starts for them too, but nobody was hoping to see Walker Buehler starting in the playoffs for the Dodgers this year. So they were the best team in the NL. They had the best run differential, but I don't know that they entered the playoffs as the best team in the NL at that point in time because their pitching staff was so broken down. And also Freddie Freeman, he's having to sit occasionally because his ankle's messed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots to unpack there. I didn't think the Dodgers would make it. I mean, they were down 2-1 against the Padres, and the Padres looked like the better team at the time, more complete team at that. And then, obviously the Mets had that magical run. Shout out to the Mets too, by the way, and the Guardians. I mean, really a magical season for the Mets. Oh my God, Grimace, everything in between. It was great for them. And then the Guardians, like first year manager Stephen Vogt, just everything clicks. So yeah, shout out to both of those teams for making it as far as they did. Can I get an official prediction from each of you? World Series? What do we got?
I'll go Yankees. I think they have the better pitching.
Yeah, I will also say Yankees in 6. You know what? I already said it. Yankees in 6.
Yeah, I was going to say Yankees in 7. That's my official prediction as well. I think we'll get lots of back and forth, lots of fireworks. Playoff G, Giancarlo Stanton. I could never say another bad word about that guy again because, my goodness, it's been so awesome to watch him.
I was talking to some Yankees fans that we work with, and one of them was like, oh, Yankees fans were never that down on Giancarlo Stanton. He got booed in his first game at Yankee Stadium.
I mean, that's anybody, though.
Right, but, you don't deserve him. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. Well, that took longer than I thought. Let's take our first break. When we return, we will recap the first base position, and we'll do that right after this.
Get ready to raise your cup to Canadian football's biggest game of the year. There ain't no party like a Grey Cup party. November 17th on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back in. Let's talk first base. The top 10 first basemen in ADP entering this past season were Freddie Freeman, Matt Olson, Bryce Harper, Pete Alonso, Vladimir Guerrero, Cody Bellinger, Paul Goldschmidt, Christian Walker, Tristan Casas, and Spencer Steer. Pretty good. Just like catchers, 6 of the top 10 were correct. Bellinger and Walker finished just outside of the top 10, and both of them dealt with some injury this year. So overall, I think the top 10 in ADP was, pretty spot on accurate here at the position. Paul Goldschmidt did take a step back. He regressed, getting a little bit older. Tristan Casas obviously got hurt, so that kind of wrecked his season. Chris, one word to describe first base this past year, and I guess just kind of like the state of first base. How do you feel about it?
Disappointing. Can I say more than one word?
Now you can, yes.
Okay. For Fangraphs has data going back to, I believe, 2002, where you can sort how the league performed at each position. So not listed at first base, but actual performance at first base when they were playing first base. This was the worst year for first baseman hitting in the last 23 years, at least. I'm frankly going to assume that it's one of the worst, if not the worst year for first baseman ever, because on the whole, I think first basemen are hitting worse than they did historically. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is, I think the universal DH has just shifted some guys who would have been first basemen in the past to a different position. I think the just getting better at defensive positioning and shifting before the band played a part in that as well. But like 20 years ago, Kyle Schwarber and Marcell Ozuna are probably first basemen, right? Like that's probably where those guys end up now. And instead, every team has more DH spots, so that I think has thinned the pool for first baseman. I think there's also just, we're in a, I went back and looked at Baseball Prospectus's top 50 prospects over the past like decade or so. And first base has been pretty bad for top 50 prospects. Brendan McKay, Pete Alonso, okay, that one worked out. Yordan Alvarez was a first baseman coming up. Andrew Vaughn, Spencer Torkelson, Tristan Casas. Those are the last like 7 years of first baseman in the top 50 overall. The last 3 or 4, especially, pretty disappointing. Casas, I know we all still have some hopes for, but there hasn't really been a top prospect at first base to hit. If you want to count Yordan Alvarez, him, if not Pete Alonso.
Yeah.
That's a pretty long time to go without like a top prospect at first base hitting. So Vladimir Guerrero was the third baseman coming up. So that is just, the first base position as a whole had a 107 weighted runs created plus. That was the lowest in the 23-year database the Fangraphs has. And I think only 3 times has it been worse than 110. So this is 2024 was a big outlier in terms of first base production.
All right. Well, go ahead, Scott.
It shows up, because those numbers you gave were for players actually playing first base.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the ones who are going to be eligible at first base heading into 2025 are the guys who are actually playing first base. And when you look at my early rankings, your early rankings for 2025, you're going to see it. It's not pretty. There are not enough starting caliber first basemen in my mind to go around in a 12-team league.
All right, let's get into the top 10 from this past season based on roto/categories, and I'll mention if they were higher or lower in a head-to-head points league. And again, I don't think we need to spend too much time on each player here because, again, this is just kind of like a taste heading into the offseason, and obviously our position previews for next season will come much later on. But let's start off with the number 1 first baseman, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who was also the top first baseman in head-to-head points. It was not particularly close. He had 85 more fantasy points than the number 2 first baseman, who was Freddie Freeman in that format. And Vlad had his best season since that breakout in 2021. He hit 323 with 30 homers, 103 RBI, and a 940 OPS. He's 26 years old, incredibly durable, entering a contract year. Scott, my only hesitation, I guess, moving forward with Vlad is that now you'll have to spend a probably, 1-2 turn pick on him, late first, early second round pick on him. And we have seen year-to-year inconsistency, right? Massive 2021, 2 years in between where he was solid. He didn't kill you, but he also just wasn't amazing. And then obviously we just had this big year. So that might be my only hesitation.
Yeah, because I thought I would see in the underlying numbers why things turned around for Vladimir Guerrero. So whether it was putting the ball in the air more, putting the ball in the air in the appropriate direction more, meaning pulling it in the air more. But that didn't really happen. So it's hard for me to say, okay, here's what he did, and this is why it's sustainable. His expected stats on StatCast were better. They were amazing. 323 expected batting average, 576 expected slug. Those both look a lot like his 2021 season where he hit the 48 home runs and was the best player in fantasy. So it's reading something Vladimir Guerrero did differently. But I don't know. I don't know why. I can't say with great confidence that that his 25 and 26 won't go like his 22 and 23 did, where he still had great expected stats, but they weren't as good, and his overall numbers didn't justify where you drafted him.
If you believed there was something tangible holding Vladimir Guerrero back from living up to his expected stats in 2022 and 2023, I don't think there's, like you said, much reason to believe that he made tangible changes that should have changed that. He pulled the ball less often. He hit the ball slightly less often in the air. So I think the case for Vladimir Guerrero is just, one, just look at the expected stats. The skill set is clearly awesome. And two, he just ran cold in 2023. Like that, I think that's the case. And I have no way of proving that. Because 2022, he actually just didn't have good expected stats. He just wasn't as good. 2023 is really the only year where you have the big underperformance.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to... Go ahead.
Well, yeah. I mean, 2022 were the worst of the expected stats, but they were still a lot better than his actual performance. So, yeah, I mean, having said all of that, I still am inclined to think Vladimir Guerrero is really as good as he showed in 2024. Because that's what I thought after his good 2022. That's what I thought after his not so good 2023. And then 2024, the 2 disappointing years in a row, it was like, okay, now I'm not so sure. But it is, he has had an unpredictable history so far.
And I'll just say, if the floor is 26 homers, 95 RBI, there are worse picks you can make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Vlad has been a top 24 player 3 of the past 4 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, that one 2022 season, he was 62nd overall, or no, I think that was actually in 2023.
I think 2022 he was a little better than 2023.
Yeah, so 2023 62nd overall, which that's pretty bad. Again, it doesn't completely sink you, but let's move on to number 2. That was Bryce Harper, who is 1 spot lower in total head-to-head points, just behind Freddie Freeman in that format. Solid season for Harper. He hit 285 with 30 homers, 85 runs, 87 RBI, 7 steals, and an 898 OPS. He's been very consistent recently. He's been between a 285 and 293 batting average and between an 877 and 900 OPS each of the past 3 years. So incredible consistency. He's dealt with some injury during those years, but in terms of just batting average and OPS, it's been very consistent for Bryce Harper. Chris, does it worry you at all that Harper overperformed his expected stats this past season? And those expected stats were actually his lowest collectively since 2016.
Yeah, I mean, because he's 32, I think it's reasonable to take a look at that and say, hey, maybe the skill set's declining here. I don't know how, he hit the ball a little less hard, and that's, a couple of years in decline now. So, maybe that's what we're seeing. I can't say I'm too worried about it, but yeah, if I think the gap between him and Freddie Freeman for next year is really small. And I don't think there's much of a gap to Matt Olson either. So I don't really have super strong opinions about this next, well, I guess not this next group that we're going to be talking about, but that group of players. I think they're all in a tier.
All right, the number 3 first baseman was Josh Naylor. He was actually one spot lower in total head-to-head points as well, behind Harper and Freeman. And he finally managed to stay healthy and had a big year. 243 batting average, 31 homers, 108 RBI, 6 steals, and a 776 OPS. Didn't really notice much of a change in his batted ball data or quality of contact. I think it's mostly because he stayed healthy, and we know that Progressive Field played much better for left-handed power this past season. We also saw that kind of play out in his home road splits. He was much better at home than he was on the road this past season. Josh Naylor was. Scott, would you bet on Naylor coming close to this type of production again?
Yeah, I would bet on him doing this again. He was kind of underwhelming as the season went on because he came on so strong at the beginning. He looked like a stud at first base. He ended up being the 3rd best first baseman ahead of mainstays like Freddie Freeman and Pete Alonso. But in the second half, he had a 717 OPS.
Yeah.
Did Josh Naylor. His batting average finished around 240. I don't know that he can be much better than that is the thing. And obviously the Freemans and Alonsos and Matt Olsons of the world can. We've seen it before. Josh Naylor you would expect him to hit for average because of how little he strikes out, but he really sells out for the power. And so if he's not playing in a more favorable environment, one that's conducive to left-handed power, like we saw from Progressive Field this past year, I could see things going really poorly for him. Fortunately, Progressive Field is playing like it is, so it's probably fine. He'll probably do something similar again to this next year, but I do think there are limits to his upside. Having said that, low strikeout rate, Josh Naylor plays a lot better in a points league than a roto league.
Also just it's weird to have an RBI standout, but he is a legitimate RBI standout because of the spot he hits in the order, because of his extra base power and high contact rate. That just lends itself to a ton of RBI. He had 97 in 121 games the year before this.
Yeah. And the team context too. I mean, he has 2 players ahead of him, or sometimes 3 if he bats cleanup, in, Steven Kwan, Jose Ramirez. Those guys are on base all the time. I mean, Kwan just wrecks havoc on opposing teams. So yeah, just having those players on base for you and making contact as much as he does. Yeah, I think that usually bodes well for the RBI total for Josh Naylor. The number 4 first baseman was Freddie Freeman, who jumps up in a points league. He was the number 2 first baseman in that format. Does have a slight edge in plate discipline and plate appearances over Harper and Josh Naylor. Is father time approaching? It might be on Freddie Freeman. Everything took a step back. He hit 282 with 22 homers, 81 runs, 89 RBI, 9 steals, 854 OPS. Still a perfectly fine season, but obviously we were judging him as a top 5, top 10 pick this past year, and he didn't necessarily live up to that. The quality of contact, just kind of middling at this point for Freddie Freeman. Chris, it wouldn't shock me if we get a bounce back, right? Like we kind of saw Paul Goldschmidt in his early 30s fall off and then kind of bounce back, fell off again. But it wouldn't surprise me if it happens for Freeman. He's also going to be 35 years old on opening day.
Yeah, I mean, that's the concern, is just how invested do you want to be in the bounce back candidate, the bounce back prospects of a 35-year-old. Like it wouldn't surprise me, I agree, but it's not necessarily something I think you can or should bet on. That being said, there was one thing that I remember early on in the season, he talked about, I think he said it in spring training. If Shohei wants to run, I'm going to take every time, or whatever the quote was. He did hit a little worse with men on base than he did with the bases empty. And I do wonder if there's something to that where he just let a few more hittable pitches go by than he necessarily should have in pursuit of that. But I also can't say for sure how many of his plate appearances came with Shohei Ohtani on base or anything like that. So that's one thought I have, but I think the likelier explanation is he's just 35 and he's probably just not quite as good as he used to be. And I think it will be he's going to decline on a gliding path. Like, I don't think it's going to, the bottom's going to drop out, but yeah, I think you could make the case for him as low as 4th for 2025.
I think to whatever degree Freeman is declining, that's going to be factored into his price.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the last time Freddie Freeman wasn't a first rounder or at least a borderline first rounder. He's going to be more like a borderline second rounder in drafts next year. So I think I actually think that has less to do with his own performance than just so many quality hitters emerging
Mm-hmm.
and him kind of being the also ran among that group. But okay, the power. So all 3 of his years with the Dodgers, he's fallen short of 30 homers. And so obviously that has to be the expectation now. 20 to 25 homers as opposed to 30 to 35. And maybe we could have already said that going into this year. I think the increase in stolen bases his first 2 years at the Dodgers kind of softened that blow of the power, but he went back to 9 steals this past season. So I don't think we should factor in Freddie Freeman making much of a contribution in stolen bases anymore either. The main way I think the thing I think you can really just write off as a fluke for Freddie Freeman was the batting average, which was still a very good 282. Yeah. But his line drive rate was, I think, the lowest it's ever been. And that to me doesn't seem like any sort of age-related thing. And so I wouldn't be at all surprised if Freddie Freeman bounced back with a 300 batting average. And of course, he's still an Iron Man. He did miss some time this year with the ankle injury, and it's been bothering him through the postseason. But the fact he's playing through it at all, is kind of speaks to his willingness to, or his determination to play. And in that lineup, batting high in that lineup, if he's batting 300, he's going to have a ton of runs in RBI. If it's only 20 to 25 homers and only 5 steals, I think that's still going to be an early round performer.
And we've seen this just kind of randomly with hitters in really good lineups where the counting stats just weren't there for whatever reason. I mean, Bryce Harper, same thing, right? He was right in the same range, 85 to 90 runs in RBI each. Yordan Alvarez in one of the best lineups in baseball, same thing happened to him. And Jose Ramirez, this happened to him last year. Granted, the Guardians lineup was not nearly as good as these other lineups we're talking about, but we just saw J-Ram bounce back in a huge way where the runs in RBI just boosted up dramatically. So it wouldn't surprise me when I say like bounce back for Freeman. Can he hit 300 next year with, 22, 23 home runs, 100 runs, 100 RBI, 7-8 steals? Yeah,
that's exactly what I'd expect. Yeah.
And if he does that, he's probably, returns top 12 value.
And in one of these early draft champions leagues that's going on at NFBC, he went in the 3rd round of a 15-team league, I'm pretty sure, or right at the 2-3 turn.
So that'd be
like
30-ish.
Yeah, I'll take Freddie Freeman all day at that price. I think him and Trey Turner were actually in that range, which that'd be Shohei Ohtani plus Freddie Freeman plus Trey Turner seems like a heck of a way to start a league.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're talking about the same draft, but yeah, I saw one where Trey Turner was drafted 45th.
Yeah.
And that made no sense to me. I could not wrap my head around that one at all. I could understand Freddie Freeman sliding, but not Trey Turner.
Yeah.
The number 5 first baseman was Pete Alonso, still one of the premier power bats in the game, but he has kind of regressed overall as a hitter. The strikeouts have jumped up a little bit. They're not egregious by any means, but there was a 2-year span where he was below 20%. Now that's been up over 20% each of the past 2 years. And the OPS has been at 788 and 821 in each of the past 2 years as well. So that's a pretty good hitter, but it's not the Pete Alonso we saw earlier on in his career. He's turning 30. He's a pending free agent. So there are some questions here regarding Pete Alonso. Scott.
Yeah, I have some questions because for the years leading up to this one, he had a surprisingly good strikeout rate for a power hitter, which was part of the reason why, for example, he hit 217 in 2023. And we kind of gave him a pass for that because, oh, look, he struck out 23% of the time. The year before, he struck out 19% of the time. The year before, 20% of the time. Like this is a guy who, if anything, should be hitting for higher averages than he's been doing. And so 2017 just seems like a total aberration. Well, he did bounce back with a 240 batting average, but the strikeout rate continued to trend up.
And the power wasn't there.
And well, yeah, and in particular in the second half, what was the number? I think he struck out like close to 30% of the time in the second half, and I couldn't really find a great explanation for it. So I still think Pete Alonso is essentially Pete Alonso, but now there's that little sliver of doubt in my mind that, oh, maybe this guy is on the decline, and I do see him as a tier below the normal top three, the Guerrero, Harper, Freeman class.
Here is one sign that pitchers might be less afraid of Pete Alonso. He's gone from early in his career, about 43 to 45% of the pitches were in the strike zone against him. Last year, 2023, it was 47. 2024, 48%. So pitchers are challenging Pete Alonso in a way we've never seen before, and he is not making them pay. And you see, like, the quality of contact is just a little bit worse than it's been at his best. And he's going to be 30 this year. This is one where, I said, I think Freddie Freeman declines on a glide path. Pete Alonso is absolutely one I could see going like Chris Davis bad if he gets a long-term contract this year. I would be very, very scared of, and that's not to say I won't draft him in 2025. We'll see where he lands and what the lineup context is. He's another guy who I think you can bet on some RBI and run regression if he returns to New York. Those run and RBI numbers were pretty low relative to what you should expect, but this is the one player heading into free agency the last few years where I'm like, if he only signs a 1-year contract, I think that would make perfect sense.
Yeah, his free agency is fascinating to me. Pete Alonso here that we're talking about. It's just, how do you value a right-handed slugging first baseman who's bad defensively? And again, it feels like it's probably a skill set that's not going to age very well. And I'm sure other teams out there are thinking the exact same thing. And he has Scott Boras as his agent. So we'll see what happens here with Pete Alonso. Let's take our final break. When we return, we'll finish up recapping first base and take an early look at our top 12 at the position. We'll do that right after this.
It's a team almost too good to be true.
You guys ain't ready for us.
Kick your game day off right as the Tops team tackles all the biggest headlines around the league.
Who's got 2 thumbs and loves this next segment?
Sunday mornings on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back in. Recapping the top 5 first basemen from this past season: Vladimir Guerrero, Bryce Harper, Josh Naylor, Freddie Freeman, and Pete Alonso. Number 6 was Spencer Steer, a very useful player who squeezes the most out of his fantasy-friendly skill set. One of 12 players to go 20 and 25, 20 homers, 25 steals this past season, but the batting average came way down from 271 to 225. Still very good plate discipline metrics, definitely under the hood, good plate discipline. But Chris, I just wonder how long the leash is if that batting average continues to trend down. Like if he's hitting 200 on June 1st, is Spencer Steer still an everyday player?
Probably somewhere. He's got that defensive versatility, or it's entirely possible the Reds trade him this offseason. Like I think that's a team that kind of desperately needs to make some trades, and he's one of the guys I would be looking to move if I was them. It does feel like the skill set is like dancing on a knife's edge, right? Where like the plate discipline's good, that helps. The home ballpark, very good, that helps. The quality of contact metrics are really mediocre, pretty much across the board. Like he doesn't really seem to do very much well once he puts the bat on the ball. He just does it often enough and, optimizes his launch angles well enough that he's been a pretty useful fantasy option. But yeah, this is another one where if we weren't drafting Spencer Steer this time next year, I really wouldn't be particularly surprised if that happened.
And he has a new manager in Terry Francona. I don't know if that's good or bad for him, but the fact is Terry Francona is inheriting Spencer Steer. So it's not like he owes him anything. There's no loyalty there. I mean, obviously it seems like the organization likes Spencer Steer, but if he gets off to a slow start again, will Terry Francona stick with him? I don't know. So I do just worry about that.
I don't like Spencer Steer.
What did he do to you?
Yeah, that seems wrong.
I don't like him. I don't like this profile at all. I had him as a bust going into this year, and I can't say he busted. But
he was pretty good.
He took a step back. He hit. We're talking about a guy who hit 225 overall. Yeah. He hit 198 in the second half. The fact that he stole bases and the fact that he plays his home games in Cincinnati, those are the only things saving Spencer Steer here. And, if he got traded, I think it would totally, his value should totally bottom out at that point. And yeah, he would have to be in a spot where we could trust him to keep playing every day, because I don't think his actual numbers justify him playing every day. And so the Reds have a lot of interesting pieces that'll hopefully be healthier next year. After hiring Terry Francona, I mean, who knows what this roster is even going to look like next year. But I don't think I think Spencer Steer is his value in fantasy might lead people to believe he's a better player than he actually is. And that always is a dangerous combination when you're ranking a player for fantasy.
He had 25 expected home runs in Cincinnati. If he had played every game at Cincinnati, he would have had 11 in Pittsburgh, 12 in Detroit, 10 in Baltimore. Baltimore is probably the far end in terms of the impact it would have on a player like Spencer Steer, but that's I think any trade to the wrong location certainly would be disastrous potentially for Spencer Steer.
Yeah, Steer hit 20 home runs. His expected home runs, according to StatCast, 16.8.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You knock a few home runs off there. It's a low batting average. We'll see. I don't know. We keep doubting Spencer Steer, and overall, it was still a productive fantasy season. Number 7.
He lost 50 points of batting average and 100 points of OPS from his rookie season.
100%. He was also still a top 60 player in fantasy. So
yeah. It's like it just, I don't know. Chris already said it, but it just feels like a house of cards here waiting to topple.
Yep. Number 7 first baseman is Matt Olson, who kind of feels like the hitter version of Aaron Nola, how we have that like year on, year off inconsistency. He had a down season after that career year in 2023, but this season hit 247, 29 homers, 98 RBI. Again, it's not a terrible season by any means, but just nowhere close to what he did the year prior. Olson's OPS by year starting in 2018, 788, 896, 734, 911, 802, 993, 790, which Scott, means we're getting a near 1,000 OPS again in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, it's still within his ability to do that. And so I think as long as you're not drafting him to do that, if you're drafting him more according to his forward-facing numbers, then it's all gravy at that point. I think it's basically his downside. What he just did is Matt Olson's downside. A 247 batting average, 29 homers, 98 RBI. And for a third-round pick, it's
not that much different than what Josh Naylor did.
Yeah, except it's probably Naylor's his kind of baseline stat line, and Olson again, it's more like the floor. So 2 of the last 3 years he's been closer to a 240 hitter, but as you pointed out, Frank, it's not like it's not like that is you could just pencil in Olson for those numbers.
Yeah. I think just conservatively projecting 250 to 260 with 35 to 40 home runs for Matt Olson. And if he does that while batting third or fourth for the Braves, assuming Acuna's healthy and everyone's good to go, then the counting stat should obviously be pretty awesome once again here for Matt Olson. Let's get into our number 8 first baseman. Let's kind of move quickly through these three because I do want to get to your early rankings. Number 8 at the position was actually Salvador Perez, but we spoke about him on the catcher recap. Please use him at catcher. Do not use Salvador Perez at first base unless you are desperate for some reason. But outside of him, the number 8 first baseman was Alec Burleson, who actually won't have first base eligibility on CBS to start the year, but I would bet on him gaining it pretty early in the season, assuming they don't sign somebody, but they've already announced that they are not bringing back Paul Goldschmidt. So that makes me think that Alec Burleson will be the starting first baseman for the St. Louis Cardinals, and he enjoyed a breakout 2024 where he hit 269 with 21 homers, 9 steals, and a 735 OPS. He did fade in the second half, but overall, I really like this profile, Chris. It reminds me a lot of Josh Naylor before his breakout. Now, I don't know if Burleson has that type of ceiling. Probably power-wise, no, I don't think so. But overall, I do like this profile. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Scott mentioned at the beginning when you go through the rankings and you reach a point where you're like, oh, first base isn't good. I think this is that point. Not that like anybody is going to rank Alec Burleson this high. He's not a first baseman, but even if he was, I don't really have much interest in it. Like I don't want to say last year was the best case scenario for him as a hitter because he's young enough at 25 that there could be room to grow. And he did underperform his expected stats a little bit. That's something that has happened a couple of times now in, 2 tastes of the majors. So there might be something there. He feels like just a guy. Like he'll make a lot of contact. I think 20 to 25 homers and decent RBI numbers if he hits high in that lineup. But as a player, he feels utterly replaceable.
Yeah, poor on base skills, which don't have a lot of direct impact in 5x5 leagues, but it'll impact how much he plays. He's terrible against left-handed pitchers. They basically stopped playing him against left-handed pitchers late in the season. So we're probably talking about a platoon player, even if he is the Cardinals' first baseman. I only rank Alec Burleson 56th in the outfield.
Yeah, he didn't make my top 48.
Which was surprising to me going in. I figured, top 40, something like that. But 50, the more I looked at Alec Burleson, the more I was like, yeah.
A poor man's Kerry Carpenter.
A less consistent playing Lourdes Gurriel.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, Frank. Sorry to let you down.
I
liked him a lot more when there were no expectations.
It seems like one where like you could get to the end of the season and be like, oh, Alec Burleson hit 270 with 24 homers and drove in 88 runs. And like,
that would be a really good season.
That'd be pretty, but like as it's happening, it's like, okay, sure, I'll start him. Yeah. But like it never, there are other first basemen we haven't talked about who I think can be no doubt must start players. I don't think Alec Burleson's that.
I like that. The thing that could change everything for Alec Burleson is if he turns into a 300 hitter, which you don't have to squint too hard to see that happening. He hits the ball well to all fields. He makes a lot of contact. He has a pretty good line drive rate, but he ended up hitting only 269 this year. His expected batting average was 274. I think something 265 to 275 is more realistic. And again, that's for probably a part-time player.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, the splits thing, definitely, I do not like. 111 max exit velocity, 72nd percentile. Maybe there's a little bit more juice in that bat. We'll see what happens with Alec Burleson. The number 9 first baseman was Yainer Diaz, but we spoke about him on the catcher recap. Again, please use him at catcher, not at first base. But if we move past Yainer Diaz, the next first baseman was Christian Walker, who missed some time with an oblique injury this season. But other than that, he's been very consistent the past 3 years. During that span, between an 803 and 830 OPS, between a 217 and 239 ISO, a very consistent power bat. I'd put him one tier below Olson and Alonso, But again, I'd expect something like 30-ish home runs from Christian Walker. Some questions here as well, Scott, as Walker, also a pending free agent like Alonso, but he's also older at 34 years old.
Yeah, he's been very consistent since, 3 years in a row now in terms of what the percentages look like. He missed some time with an injury this year, so that brought the totals down. But he's basically been the exact same guy 3 years in a row as Christian Walker, and it's been pretty high end. Not quite, stud territory, but he's been very good at outperforming his draft position. So the free agency obviously adds an element of uncertainty. Wouldn't surprise me at all if the Diamondbacks brought him back. That's something I think we should all be rooting for. But as things stand now, I have him as kind of the last first baseman that if you draft him, you feel pretty set at the position.
I think that's fair. And with that, number 10, someone who you might not feel set at the position, someone that I know we all had questions on and entering this year. Guess what? We still have questions on Cody Bellinger, who was the number 10 first baseman. Seems pretty likely to opt into the 2 years, $52 million remaining on that contract with the Chicago Cubs. He took a step back across the board. He was still solid, 266 with 18 homers, 9 steals, 751 OPS. Last offseason, we were trying to figure out who is Cody Bellinger. It kind of feels like he became a contact hitter, really bad quality of contact. The expected stats are really bad as well. Chris, I think I'd expect something like a 270 batting average, 20 homers, 15 steals, and good counting stat. I mean, that's a good player. It's one that doesn't blow you away. Kind of unique skill set from the first base position because you don't really get many steals at this position.
Yeah. So my jokey response is he needed to be in more 2-strike counts in 2024. Clearly, that's where things went wrong for him. My serious response is the overall profile looks so much less interesting if it's 9 steals instead of 20, which is where it was in 2023 when he stole 20 bases in 130 games. Only 9 in 2024. Like, if you're getting 20 steals from a first baseman and he hits for a decent average and not much power, but like in a good lineup spot, like, you can talk yourself into that. The version that we got in 2024, yeah, he was a top 10 first baseman. It felt pretty unimpactful as it was happening. And, he's another guy where he's going to be 30 next year. Do you want to bet on the 30-year-old bouncing back athletically? Like, he didn't really lose much athleticism in terms of the sprint speed. It was just, he didn't run as much. And I know there's some injuries and maybe that explains it, but it's another one where I'm not going to be the one who drafts Cody Bellinger, I guess.
I am not eager to do so. I'll have more to say when we get into our top 12. I think it'll be easier for the listener to follow if I address it then.
I think I could be more likely to draft him in 2025, assuming the ADP comes down. He was like anywhere from like a 4th to a 6th round pick, depending on the draft last year. If that comes down slightly, I think I could be in on Bellinger. Still 77th percentile sprint speed. And you mentioned the injuries, a fractured rib. That could maybe hamper his aggressiveness on the base paths. So,
there were some weird things going on with the Cubs and stolen bases.
Yes.
They stole all of them in the second half, basically.
Right. Like Horner wasn't running much early on. Swanson wasn't running much early on. Maybe Cody Bellinger just didn't get the memo late in the season. And so he wasn't able to make up the same ground in that category. I don't know. It was Craig Counsell taking over, and it's not like he is opposed to stealing bases. So it's hard to know exactly what happened there.
All right, let's wrap up by looking at some early 2025 first base rankings. We will compare and contrast Scott and Chris's top 12. And starting with the top 6, Scott has Vladimir Guerrero, Bryce Harper, Freddie Freeman, Matt Olson, Pete Alonso, and Josh Naylor. Chris's top 6, guess what? The same 6, just in a slightly different order. Vladimir Guerrero, Freddie Freeman, Bryce Harper, Matt Olson, Pete Alonso, and Josh Naylor. So the only difference is that Scott has Harper ahead of Freeman, and then Chris has it swapped. So Anything to add there? I mean, it feels
I
straightforward.
have no real argument one way or the other on that one. If you want to put Harper ahead of Freeman, I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, as we talked about, there are those small indicators of decline for Freeman that I don't really see for Harper. You mentioned his exit velocity was down a little bit, but if you want to go back, 4 or 5 years in his career, it was right in line with that, and we all still thought of Harper as a stud then. So I think I just have more confidence Harper is still Harper than Freeman is still Freeman, though I think the current version of Freeman is very good. I did want to bring up that we both have Matt Olson ranked ahead of Pete Alonso, which I wasn't certain we would, because Alonso was the better of the two this past year. And normally it's like, well, just draft whichever of those two was worse the year before, because he's going to be a relative discount and he might, they were essentially the same player. But I guess we don't see them that way anymore, because even though Olson was the worst of the two, he's the one we want more.
Olson's skill set feels a little less fragile than Alonso's. And I think part of it is also Alonso is a free agent. We just don't know what that's going to look like, right? Like, does he not sign until March? I think that's on the table. Like that, if Pete Alonso's a free agent 2 weeks before the season, I wouldn't really be shocked. So that's another one where I think there's just a little bit more uncertainty there. And I think Olson's demonstrated ceiling the last few years is higher.
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. And one that I was going to bring up, because some people might just look back at this season and think, oh, I got burned by Matt Olson, I don't want to go back to the well. But yeah, I think as of now, I would bet on Olson being better than Alonso next year, even if it is just slightly better. Scott's 7 through 12 at first base. We have Christian Walker, Spencer Steer, Salvador Perez, Vinny Pasquantino, Tristan Casas, and Cody Bellinger. And for Chris, it's Spencer Steer, Vinny Pasquantino, Christian Walker, Tristan Casas, Cody Bellinger, and Salvador Perez. So you guys actually have the same 12 players between the two of you. Scott does have Christian Walker a little bit higher. Chris, you have Steer, Vinny P,
baby,
and Casas a touch higher in your rankings. Is there anything you just want to hit on from this grouping before? I do want to spend a little bit of time on Pasquantino and Tristan Casas, because I think they'll be pretty popular players.
Well, I think the thing for me is like, who didn't we include? And then you start looking at it. Oh God, there's nobody that I feel like when I looked at the top 12 just now, it's been 3 weeks since I did this exercise. It was like, oh really? That's the top 12. Like those guys are all, and then I was like, oh, who are we missing? And it's like, well, Isaac Paredes, I have no faith. Like if he was still in Tampa, maybe, but no,
he doesn't have first base eligibility.
He's not first. Top 20, and 13 through 20 is pretty awful. So this is what I wanted to get into with Bellinger from before, because you were saying, I don't see myself drafting Bellinger. I'm not enthusiastic about drafting Bellinger either. Yeah. But here's the thing. I put together my top 20 first baseman article before the season had actually ended. Cody Bellinger got his 20th appearance at first base on the last day of the season. So he just barely retained eligibility at this position. And by default, he slotted in as number 12 for me, because before then, my number 12 first baseman was Michael Toglia. And I did not feel good about that.
No.
So like if we're talking a 12-team league, no corner infield spot or anything, there, like if Bellinger actually goes 12th where I rank him, you might take him just because you're the last one to take a first baseman.
Except you're overstating the case for first base. Okay. You have Salvador Perez in your top 10.
Well, that's true. He's going to be a catcher, and then
Cody Bellinger's 11.
And of course, it's possible Spencer Steer's drafted to play the outfield. It's possible Cody Bellinger's drafted to play the outfield.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean you're right. It's not actually even going to work out that Cody Bellinger is going to be the 12th truly first baseman drafted. So just to avoid being the one to take Michael Toglia or Jake Berger, who I've ranked behind him, or Luis Arraez, who's not even second base eligible anymore. He's only a first baseman, so you can't say, oh, versatility, I'm going to draft Arraez. He's 15th for me. That doesn't feel good to have a non-power hitter as your starting first baseman, but that may be what happens for some people.
Two that could sneak up, depending on where Paul Goldschmidt lands. I know the first half was really bad. He got better in the second half. Still provides 10-ish steals at first base. Like, can he hit 250 with 20 homers, 10 steals again? Like, I don't think that's crazy. Like, if he goes to Houston, I think we'd be pretty excited about Paul Goldschmidt again. Not like overly, but based on the end of that top 12, maybe Ryan Mountcastle. If the Orioles trade him,
that's the one. Yeah,
there's another one too that could be interesting because the Statcast data is still pretty good there on Ryan Mountcastle.
And they're 16 and 17, so they're right behind a rise for me.
Yep.
Mountcastle, I agree 100%. Goldschmidt, he was better in the second half, but I think that the signs of decline are just so clear there. It feels like a Jose Abreu situation where we're able to squint and see reasons for optimism. And he actually went to Houston, the spot you were talking about at that point in his career, and
that's true.
It didn't get any better. It only got worse.
I look at the landscape and I kind of think it's top 6 or bust for me almost. I'm not saying that entirely, but Christian Walker's 34, Vinny Pasquantino, we all like Tristan Casas. We all think there's breakout potential, but we haven't seen it as much as we'd like to from those guys. Where is it really worth paying a premium for those guys ahead of, not that Jake Berger or Rhys Hoskins are all that good.
I don't even have Hoskins in the top 20.
I mean, he hit 26 homers and drove in 86 runs or something last year. He wasn't good, and the batting average was really bad. But if it's a top 100 pick on Vinny Pasquantino, if he gets pushed up there, I don't know if that premium's worth paying. I
agree with that. My first thought was, I don't think there would be a premium on either of those guys, Vinny P or Casas. I could be wrong. My first thought was I think they'd be outside of the top 125 picks.
I hope so.
Yeah. I hope so too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good point because you keep bringing up guys and I'm like, oh, they're not in my top 20. So I don't think there are a lot of number one first basemen. A lot of those, if you look at the top 12, there's not enough to go around. But there is kind of among the just kind of mediocre middle at the position, it does run pretty deep.
There are plenty of guys who can hit 20 to 25 homers at first.
Great corner infield position.
Right.
Basically.
Right. So if we're
Michael Busch is okay.
So if we're talking about a 15-team league, a deep league, a corner infield league, then maybe you won't see Pasquantino and Casas pulled up for scarcity reasons, in which case they're going to be attractive picks for me because I actually want to have a good first baseman and not one from the mediocre middle.
Quick thought on each of those guys. Vinny P, 262, 19 homers, 97 RBI, 760 OPS. He's kind of the inverse of Spencer Steer. He hits the ball hard, hits a decent amount of fly balls. He pulls the ball a lot, yet his barrel rate is 7.1% in the 42nd percentile, and he's kind of held back by playing in Kauffman Stadium. He hit 19 home runs. His expected home runs was 22.6. He would have hit 30 in Yankee Stadium, 32 in Cincinnati. So I think that probably should just be the expectation, Chris, is 260 with 20 to 22 home runs, but probably good counting stats here from Vinny P.
Yeah, that's one that I do wonder, is there something where when he does pull the ball, he either hits it too high or too low, right? So that's one of those things where there must be some explanation for why the power's not quite where we want it. He hits either a lot of high but relatively harmless fly balls to the pull side or something. That's my thought on why Vinny Pasquantino hasn't quite been as good as we hoped. I think the expectation should be 20 homers, and the hope is I do think there's a 30 homer ceiling there. It's just how likely is he to get to it? I'm not 100% sure on that. I feel pretty. I don't want to overdraft Vinny Pasquantino again, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing holding back the home run output specifically is just where he plays his home games. And it's a pretty good hitters apart from home runs, as we talked about during the season. And we did see him over his final 52 games. Vinny Pasquantino hit 300 exactly. So it's just you want home runs from your first baseman. I think even playing in Kansas City, you can count on Vinny Pasquantino to be a good hitter.
Yeah.
But obviously he's not going to steal bases, and the home runs are going to be kind of underwhelming for a first baseman. So he might be if you want to talk about the player whose value at a position improves the most in a points league versus a roto league, I think Pasquantino is that guy at first base. I actually rank him 7th there versus 10th in roto. So in points leagues, I have Pasquantino ahead of Christian Walker, Spencer Steer, and Salvador Perez, who only ranks that high because of the catcher eligibility, obviously.
And I do want to say, every year I do like a name brand versus replacement options piece. And I might do that with Vinny Pasquantino and Josh Naylor, because they're like, Naylor hit for a lot more power this year. And if that's the case moving forward, then it doesn't really work. But like, there might not be that big of a difference between the two of them. Like, really good RBI numbers. I think Vinny P's a better bet for batting average. Naylor a better bet for power. But like, the overall picture might not be that different at the end of 2025 for those two guys.
If you want to talk about points leagues, Josh Naylor was 3.1 points per game this past year, and Vinny Pasquantino was 3.0.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It was very close. Their head-to-head point per game production.
I had that exact thought, Chris, while doing all my research earlier today, except it was with Alec Burleson and Josh Naylor, but it sounds like I'm on Alec Burleson Island for now. Quick thought on Tristan Casas. He was limited to just 63 games because of a fractured rib. He still managed 13 home runs, but the strikeout rate ballooned to 31.7%. Was it related to the injury? It kind of looked like he was breaking out early on in April. He hit for much better power there. Scott, where are you at now on Tristan Casas, someone we were all pretty excited about?
Yeah, I don't know how to feel anymore, because I loved him as a prospect. I loved him coming into 2024. Let's not forget that in the second half of 2023, Tristan Casas slashed 317, 417, 617. So he looked like he was en route to becoming an absolute stud. And I still think he could be. But yeah, the strikeout rate ballooned this year, both before and after the injury, returning from the injury. And so maybe it was just, we should just chalk it up as a lost season. Like it was a bad injury he suffered. It cost him a lot of time. It threw off his timing in all likelihood. It just kind of derailed him. And maybe he'll come back, Tristan Casas, and it'll be like 2024 never happened. But I think that's a plausible scenario, but what do I want to invest in that scenario? The fact that first base is weak, I think is going to compel me to see the glass half full more. But Casas is only my 11th ranked first baseman, so I'm only willing to see it so full.
All right, we are going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning into Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And we will be back again on Thursday. Bye-bye.